Hello and welcome to History Respond. I'm John Harney. In the last video we posted, I had gone to Atlanta in Georgia to the Popular Culture Association annual meeting where I met up with special guest star, History Respond founder Bob Whitaker. Bob and I talked about his talk at the conference, which was about the Civilopedia, which is, the collected kind of knowledge pertaining to the Civilization series of games maintained independently by game lovers and game people for a few decades at this particular point. I thought the video was great, and I definitely recommend people check it out. This week what I wanted to do was share a little bit about what I talked about at the conference, which was Animal Crossing. And specifically, I'm working on this book project at the moment about how we can kind of use Japanese games as a cipher or a key to kind of understand Japanese history. And beyond that, to understand the ways in which Japanese artists and the games they're creating are kind of reproducing interpretations of Japanese history. And I've been thinking about different kind of games I would talk about, Metal Gear Solid, various kind of samurai-themed games and things like that. Probably a couple of games made by Westerners about Japan as well, to talk about Japan as a setting. And at previous PCA meetings, that's kind of what I focused on. What kind of Japan are we thinking about? Japan as the future, kind of ideas like that. So for this year, I wanted to talk about Animal Crossing specifically for a few different reasons. The previous conference, I had made an offhand joke about the Animal Crossing character KK Slider as a kind of a 1950s lounge musician, and how I would talk about 1950s lounge Japanese music in relation to KK Slider, and that was kind of the genesis of it, and I didn't quite get there in the end. But also I'm doing this chapter right now. I'm finally kind of getting it done. Giving the conference talk has helped to kind of concentrate my thoughts a bit about Animal Crossing, and to talk about the ways that Animal Crossing kind of presents certain visions of kind of Japanese history that are, one, really kind of understandable as a post-war phenomenon, but two, really need to be understood as kind of a manifestation of a Japanese idea of the 20th century as a whole, right? And I'll get onto that in a couple of minutes, but real quick, kind of history moment on History Respond. So, what am I talking about? I mean, World War II is this major divide in global history in the 20th century, and in the history of almost every country in the 20th century in some way, shape or form. And when we talk about the post-war world or post-war Europe or post-war Asia, for people with specialties in those areas, or if you just read a bunch of books in those areas, or if you just have passing familiarity with the history of those areas, you kind of know what that means, right? And on the one hand, in the quote-unquote Western world, in the kind of progressive, or first world as it was called in the Cold War, the developed world maybe, we sometimes call it now, these phrases are changing all the time. The post-war era is kind of marked by this kind of rise from rubble, as it were, if you think about the city of London, for example. The role of America, the increased role of America, American leadership, of quote-unquote the free world as we get into the Cold War. And then particularly get into the 60s and 70s and 80s, you see the rise of consumerism, the emergence of youth culture, the Beatles and things like that, and the end of the Cold War coming with kind of, in some ways, what is basically a victory for a certain type of popular culture. So in Japanese contexts, that has, number one, they kind of follow that to a certain extent, which is that Japan is almost kind of like a superstar of the post-war world. Japan is completely ravaged by the war. Something like 70% of their urban footprint is just gone by 1945. Of course, they're the only country that's ever been attacked with nuclear weapons. And in the 1950s and 60s, their economy grew at astonishing rates, what in the West was called the economic miracle at that time, what we now call the era of high-speed growth, where for about 20 years or so, from the early 50s to 1973, they recorded a growth in their gross national product of at least 10%, which prior to kind of early 90s China was really completely unheard of. I mean, it was just incredible growth. And particularly for video games people, this is quite meaningful because, you have the emergence of Sony, particularly in the 1950s, through transistor radios and later on more sophisticated technology. And the Japanese don't just excel at creating really good electronic consumer products. They kind of help to invent the entire concept. I mean, so a particularly important item here would be the Sony Walkman, for example. And then for you and for me, it would be the Famicom, the family computer, what later becomes the Nintendo Entertainment System, and all the various successors that come out of that. So that's kind of the Japanese context. And in addition to all of that, by the 1980s, corporates are present in Japanese life in very specific kinds of ways. Japanese cities have grown to kind of incredible sizes. The proportion of Japanese people living in the cities has skyrocketed. By the 1990s, about 80% of Japanese people live in a city, and a city like Tokyo is internationally renowned as this kind of city of the future, this ultimate metropolis and everything else. So when Animal Crossing is founded by Iguchi Katsuya and Hisashi, or Nogami Hisashi, these two men who were relatively young in the 80s, it is founded in this context. Iguchi is a little bit older and kind of has this idea of, he has the kind of conceptual ideas of what Animal Crossing is going to be. He talks about it being what family, friendship, community, things like that. And then the two men work together to kind of build it into a game. And in 2001 you have Doubotsu no Mori, which translates literally as Animal Forest, which translates then, or which is rather converted into Animal Crossing, the beginning of this series that we kind of all know about. So on one level, Iguchi and Nogami, they are, they're kind of products of a 1980s Japan, extremely corporate, driven by, a lot of success, commercial success, capitalist success, whatever you want to call it. And Animal Crossing makes sense. And Iguchi-san has talked about this. He was creating effectively a separation from those kind of dynamics and those kinds of assumptions. So that makes a lot of sense. And I think that it's true. What's interesting to me, though, is the extent to which the game kind of relays much longer term ideas that are definitely present in Japan prior to World War II. And that kind of gets us out of this World War II as a divide, post-war paradigm, which for me as an historian is really interesting. So what are some of the ways that this works? Well, one quick thing would be to say that although corporations are definitely present in Japanese life in the 1980s in a way that they're probably not 20, 30, 40 years earlier, the prominence of corporations, or certainly the corporations' kind of predecessors, the zaibatsu of the late 19th century, was a key element in kind of Japanese modernization in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. So that's not necessarily new. Ditto for the importance of cities in Japanese life. It's true that Tokyo wasn't the incredible size it would be by the 1990s, but Tokyo was a city of 1 million people as early as the 1700s. I mean, it was one of the world's most populated cities, and Japanese cities performed these very important roles within kind of Japanese life more broadly. This is a little tricky because as you probably know, Japan were, one of the bad guys, certainly the opponents of the Allies during World War II. Japanese militarists controlled the country, and increasingly East Asia historians feel more and more and more comfortable calling these people fascists, and there was a lot of oppression of people within Japan and some horrendous war crimes outside of Japan. So there's lots of reasons that a Japanese person would be very interested and motivated to embrace a kind of a post-war Japan that is completely separate. And there are key ways in which it is completely separate. I made the joke at the conference, I'm here to argue that Animal Crossing is a fascist game, just so we can see in the news, immigrant professor attacked by Japanese game culture enthusiasts. But it's not a fascist game, but it shares fascism's obsession, I'll say obsession with the countryside, with rural life. It shares that focus with much less horrible forms of conservatism or right-wing, maybe centre-right politics, where there's often been the celebration of the rural life, of an escape from the city. In the Animal Crossing series, it is kind of this innocent escape, but, in the first game, you get there via train, and railway lines were a hugely important part of Japanese imperialism, but also Japanese modernization, and it's a project they long kind of predate World War II. In addition to that, you have kind of, the museum, you have basically kind of a city hall / post office. This is in the original game, but these are all ideas that mostly stay in later games. And the game clearly has, or I would certainly argue, the game has this clear commitment to a particular version of civic life, and a kind of a civic life, a presence of the state in your life that is positive, a presence of the state that encourages community. So I think the museum is a very good example of that, where, sure, it's a game mechanic, you collect things in almost Pokemon-style collecting to make the museum more impressive, but really the end result is just that the museum is more impressive. It's really just something that you're doing for yourself at the end of the day, and maybe you're a dopamine-addled lunatic like myself who can't stop himself from doing these things, but there's nothing stopping you enjoying the game in a more kind of a laid-back way. Big kind of counter to that, of course, is Tom Nook, the famous Tom Nook, star of many fun Etsy mugs, including I'm in Debt to a Capitalist Raccoon, which is probably my personal favourite. Nook is the most kind of game mechanic-y thing in the game in many ways, or I feel that he is. He has gates to expanding your house. He's a gate to expanding his own business. In the first few days of any Animal Crossing game, it takes you a while to get the tools that you need, and then you want to upgrade those tools and everything else. So, he performs that kind of function, and he's also this rude reminder, right, that the capitalism hasn't gone anywhere. But, as much as we all kind of focus on Nook, and the game definitely funnels you towards Nook, I think the fabric of the game, like I said, the museum, City Hall, the train station, later on other types of public transport, I think that tells us a larger tale of what kind of the game is doing. And it's clear to me that the men who created the game really were responding to the things in their life and creating a certain kind of escapism from their life. But perhaps unwittingly, I feel they are reproducing much longer term Japanese kind of ideas. And I think that's important because rather than be anxious about, oh God, am I associating something with fascism, or am I legitimizing this period in Japanese history in some way, I actually think that by, being focused on this longer view and taking it away from certain figures who do want to rehabilitate fascism, and to be thinking about that longer view of Japanese history, particularly thinking of a 20th century view of Japanese history, I really think that's valuable. And I think that games they're not just in a prime position to do it, I think they're already doing it. And I think that Japanese creators have been doing this, and even Western creators who seek to emulate Japanese ideas or use Japanese settings, they participate in some of these same discourses. And this is a big animating thing that I'm interested in. And then finally, KK Slider, what about him? Well, I'm still kind of working on him in how I kind of factor him into all these kinds of ideas. He interests me in many ways because KK Slider is such a fun character in the way that he talks. So for those who don't know, he's a beagle with a guitar who often hangs out in a coffee shop. He gives concerts on Saturday evenings in most of the games. He does remind me of he's kind of an interesting exploration of a beatnik kind of an idea, of kind of a bohemian kind of character, albeit in this very kind of safe, limited way. And I think that's really interesting. And there's lots of great stuff on this, on the evolution of Japanese popular music after 1945, and the ways in which it is heavily influenced by Western ideas, and how it chooses to emulate Western ideas, at least in some specific aspects of Japanese music and pop culture. But even in these areas where sometimes Westerners might assume, oh, that's an emulation of a Western model, that often isn't the whole story. So, for example, Japanese jazz, for example, has its own clear kind of characteristics and has its own kind of functions and its own history, where Filipinos living in Japan were a big part of the origins of Japanese jazz, who themselves, of course, Filipinos had an interaction with Americans, but it's this different thing. So yeah, I mean, I want to try not to do too many videos with East Asia stuff, because it's kind of my comfort zone and there's a lot I'm interested in. But this is a book project I'm working on, so I'll probably keep the updates coming. So look out for more of that in the future, maybe a KK Slider specific episode. And I'm, looking to keep these up every couple of weeks. Really appreciate people watching. I hope you like kind of the new content. We'll just keep working on different ways of doing things and just kind of keep the channel alive. And you're always welcome to leave comments and reach out to us and say hi. And as always, thanks very much for watching.